Okay, we're live. I am 99 XP, but now we have to get 10. We have to get like 12,000 mining XP, which is why I'm live right now, because it's a grinding thing, so that we can get, so that we can get like the heart of the mountain thing. So let me quickly just get my silverfish pet out. Wait, isn't this meant to help me with mining though? Speed, the bee gives me speed. Pig. Let me ride my pig. What the? Did you guys see that? My pig is upside down. My pig went upside down. Level 49, let's go. I found a very false way to level up my guardian using the enchantment table. I'm pretty sure it's called, not the enchanting table, but like, or the experience table. It's like it looks like a piece of furniture, but you can click on it and you can do something.
Oh, a recom? At the very least, I'll take that. Just imagine there's my second handle in here right now. Boom! Oh, I saw the profit. I got hyped for a second. So yeah, unfortunately, no second handle for me yet. But I did claim that recombobulator and used it to upgrade my giant sword to the mythic rarity. But with the Hyperion saga of my journey seemingly complete for now, it was time to set my sights on my next major goal, getting extremely rich. And I had already gotten one drop that was going to make that a lot easier. Oh my god! That's it for now though, guys. So thanks for watching, and remember to use creator code RageTrain if you purchase anything on the Hypixel store. I spent 1,000 hours to get this stick in Minecraft. Here's how we got here. So, nearly 2 years ago, I challenged myself to play a much harder version of Hypixel Skyblock that would require me to grind for every item by myself. This meant no purchasing or trading for any items from other players. If I wanted something, it was entirely up to me to put in the work to get it. And despite this playstyle being much more difficult than the typical one, I accomplished a lot, acquiring many of the most powerful items along my journey. But as I began to approach the endgame, I ran into my biggest obstacle yet. The 7th dungeon floor. You see, unlike the dungeon floors that came before it, this one required some of the best gear in the entirety of the game to even stand a chance. And a lot of this overpowered gear could only be obtained through rare drops, meaning that simply having some bad luck could entirely prevent me from ever completing this floor. I was not about to shy away from this challenge though, so I started grinding. And after literal months of grinding for new armor, weapons, and utility items, I had finally assembled a set that was powerful enough for this dungeon floor, and was able to complete my first ever floor 7 run. But this was only just the beginning, because now my goal was to acquire the rarest dungeons item, the Hyperion, which required not 1, not 2, not even 3, but 4 separate incredibly rare drops, including 3 scrolls and of course the rarest drop of them all, Necron's Handle, aka the stick. And all of these drops are so rare that some players have run thousands of floor 7s and still not gotten them all. But nonetheless, I began grinding for them. And the start of this grind went insanely well, with me getting 2 out of the 3 scrolls within only 47 runs. To put that into perspective, these scrolls are at minimum a 1 in 250 drop and could be up to a 1 in 1,000 drop, so getting 2 unique ones in just 47 runs is pretty dang lucky. But then my luck took a massive turn for the worse when the admins decided to make a little change to some weapons. Remember how I mentioned I had spent months grinding for a good setup to do those floor 7 dungeons? Well, a large part of that grind was spent acquiring 4 bone meringues, which at the time were a really good weapon for archers. And this little change the admins had decided to make didn't only nerf my bone meringues, but rather destroyed them, rendering them essentially useless. So it seemed that the hundreds of hours of grinding I had put in up until this point was ultimately going to end up being worthless, as my setup was simply no longer good enough to even run floor 7 dungeons. But there was hope, because a few days after this nerf, the admins announced they would be adding 2 new bows into the game to help out archers. And these things were good. In order to acquire them though, I would need to take on a brand new Enderman boss that was extremely powerful. In fact, the boss required to obtain the stronger of the 2 bows, known as the Terminator, was so powerful that even the best players in all of Skyblock were struggling to kill it. So I decided to go for the weaker one that would still be more than enough for floor 7 anyways, known as the Juju Shortbow. Before we continue with my adventure though, I need to tell you about all the adventures you could be having in today's sponsor, Genshin Impact. Genshin Impact is an open-world action RPG that takes place in the vast magical world of Teyvat. And the best part is the game is cross-platform, so it's available on PC, Android, iOS, and PlayStation 4 and 5. The game features a beautiful open world for you to discover and explore, and there's a ton of activities in the game, so there's always something new for you to be doing. And of course, the game has their awesome elemental combat system where each character controls one of the 7 natural elements. There's also even a co-op mode where you and up to 3 of your friends can take on challenges together to get some insane loot. And now, Genshin Impact is releasing their version 2.3 update, which includes some brand new and returning characters, a new boss monster known as the Golden Wolf Lord, and even a snowstorm-themed event where you can obtain some powerful new items. And you can also use my exclusive redeem code on screen now to get 60 Primo Gems and 4 times Adventurer's Experience. So a big thank you once again to Genshin Impact for sponsoring today's video, and make sure you guys check out my link in the description below to download the game on your devices. Actually crafting this thing though was not going to be easy, as it required an insane 32 enchanted quartz blocks, which equates to roughly 800,000 quartz, and I'd also need to craft 32 null avoids, which in order to make those, I would need over 160,000 obsidian, and also about 4,000 null spheres, which are only dropped from those Enderman bosses I talked about earlier. So obviously, I had a pretty big grind in front of me, and to get started, I decided to throw down some quartz minions to help out with that 800,000 quartz I was gonna need. Admittedly, these guys were actually pretty slow at generating quartz, but I figured it would at least help take a little bit of the grind off of my shoulders. And then I shifted my focus to acquiring those null spheres. And as you can see here, the tier of Enderman boss that you kill greatly changes the amount of null spheres that you're gonna get. There was absolutely no way I was about to kill like 2,000 tier 1 Enderman bosses, because it would probably take months. But on top of that, the tier 3 and tier 4 bosses were way out of my league in terms of the gear I currently had. So that left me with the tier 2 being my only reasonable option. Even this tier was going to be pretty difficult though, and if I wanted to get all 4,000 null spheres, I was going to need to kill about 200 to 300 of them. So I needed to put together a good setup to kill these things ASAP. I began by throwing on my full set of Necron armor, which was by far my best damage set, and it also provided a pretty good amount of defense and health. But I also threw on my legendary blue whale pet because it would increase my health and defense by a massive amount. Then I pulled out my One For All Shadow Fury because it had the highest damage out of any of my weapons. And finally, I grabbed my Hurricane Bow, because the Enderman boss has a stage where you have to hit it a certain amount of times before you can continue doing damage to it. And the Hurricane Bow's ability of shooting 5 arrows at once would ideally make that stage go by a lot faster. And so, with this OP setup all equipped and ready to go, I spawned in my first ever tier 2 Enderman boss. But as it turned out, this setup was not nearly as OP as I thought it was, because within just a few seconds, I started taking so much damage that the remnants in my inventory started popping to save my life. And for a moment, I thought the 6 remnants I had brought with me might be enough to keep me alive for the entirety of the fight. But unfortunately, they weren't. And even if they had been enough to keep me alive, it wouldn't have really mattered anyway, because there was no way I could afford to burn through 5 to 6 remnants, considering I was gonna have to kill 200 to 300 of these things. So obviously, I needed to make some kind of alteration to this setup. And based on the recommendation from my Twitch chat, which, by the way, go follow me over there if you don't already, I decided to try out an item called the Mithril Coat, which would make it so that no attack could ever do more than 40% of my max HP. And while initially this might come across as kind of a useless ability, since the Enderman boss is doing so much damage, only being able to get 3-shot in like a worst case scenario might actually be an improvement. So I replaced my Necron's chestplate with this thing and then went back to the end to spawn in another boss. It was pretty much almost an exact repeat of the first fight though, and I basically just popped a bunch more remnants and died. But I wasn't giving up hope yet, so it was time to make another change. And this time around, I decided to focus in on my regen, because if the Enderman boss was going to be doing this much damage to me, I needed a way to quickly regen hearts. So I started off by swapping out my One for All Shadow Fury for my old Livid Dagger, because even though this thing was going to do way less damage, it was also going to give me way more lifesteal, which is essentially the same thing as regen. I also swapped back to my Necron chestplate because that Mithril Coat ability didn't really seem like it helped. And then for arguably the most important piece of this entire setup, I collected a bunch of diamonds and created a new helmet called the Crystallized Heart. And this thing's ability literally doubles all regeneration. And then finally, to capitalize off of this new helmet's ability, I also upgraded to a better healing wand. And then with this new regen heavy setup, pretty much as maxed out as I could possibly get it for the time being, I went back to attempt another tier 2 Enderman boss. This time around though, it seemed as if my new setup was actually gonna work, because after shredding through the boss's clicks phase with my Hurricane Bow, I started hunkering down for the melee phase, but to my surprise, all of the damage the boss was doing to me was being totally lifestealed back by my Livid Dagger. It was still obvious that the boss was doing a massive amount of damage to me, but the Livid Dagger in combination with the double regen was somehow keeping me alive. As the boss went into its next clicks phase though, I wasn't able to use my Livid Dagger for any more lifesteal and started dropping health pretty fast. But I was able to get in enough hits with my Hurricane Bow to put it back into the damage phase before I died. Unfortunately though, I hadn't been quick enough, and the lifesteal from the Livid Dagger wasn't enough to keep me afloat this time, and once again, I had failed to kill the boss. And at this point, I felt like I had pretty much made my setup as good as it could possibly be with the current stuff I had access to. So that left me with only one choice remaining, and it was something I had been vowing to never do in this series. You see, a while back, Hypixel Skyblock had added a new item called the Booster Cookie. And using the currency called bits that you gain from eating these booster cookies, you could purchase an item called the God Potion, which essentially would give you a maxed out version of every single potion effect in the game, which, as you can imagine, raised your damage, regen, health, pretty much everything by a pretty significant amount. But there was one little problem for me, and that was that you could only get these booster cookies by either paying to win or by buying them off of another player on the bazaar, which were both things that I had explicitly said were against the rules of this series. But at this point in the game, booster cookies and God Potions had essentially become a must-have if you wanted to progress into the endgame. And Hypixel themselves had even gone as far as creating a special bazaar for players who play the same game mode I do, where they could only buy booster cookies. Like, these things were that necessary to progressing in the game. And after giving all of this a ton of thought, I decided it was finally time, so I made my way over to the bazaar. And then I purchased my first ever booster cookie. It's done. It's done. And of course, the first thing I did with this shiny new booster cookie was use the bits it gave me to purchase a God Potion. And finally, with my new power from having every single maxed out potion effect in the game, I made my way back over to the end and summoned in another boss. This was the moment of truth. Would this god potion put me over the edge and allow me to finally defeat a tier 2 Enderman boss? Or did I just go through that entire process of making a huge decision all for nothing? As the fight began though, everything seemed to be going mostly okay, but the beginning of the fight was never the part I was having trouble with. And I was focused in, maybe actually a bit too focused in, because this is what my live commentary sounded like. Anyways though, the beginning of the fight seemed to go flawlessly, but that didn't really mean too much because that was never the part of the fight I had trouble with. As the fight progressed though, I continued to hold my own against the boss. And then I entered into the final phase of the boss for the first time ever. And in this phase, the boss throws out beacons that you have to go and run over to within a couple of seconds or you will just instantly die. And by some miracle, even though I had never made it to this stage of the fight, I managed to get all of the beacons and land the final blow on the boss, officially completing my first ever tier 2 Enderman. That was that was a lot of work for one. Oh my god. Okay. Jesus. But now it was time for the grind to actually begin. Because, as I mentioned to you guys earlier, each of these tier 2 bosses only drop between 14 and 24 null spheres. And I needed 4,000 of them, which meant that I was going to have to kill about another 200 or so of these bosses. But there was no point in wasting any time because I was going to have to do it at some point anyway. So I spent the rest of the day killing more of these bosses. By the end of the day though, I only had about 130 null spheres, which if we do some quick math here, is about 4% of the total amount of 4,000 that I needed. So clearly, this grind was gonna take a while. And after spending the entire next day doing nothing besides grinding null spheres once again, I needed a bit of a break. So I started working on getting some quartz, since that was another one of the materials I needed for the bow. And my strategy to do this was actually pretty simple. I just threw as many minion expanders as I currently had on my quartz minions, and started mining the quartz they placed. Which might seem like it would be a really slow process to get all the quartz I needed, considering I needed 800,000 of it, but it actually worked surprisingly well. The only issue though was that I was able to mine all of the quartz faster than the minions could place it, so I couldn't just sit on my island and infinitely mine quartz. Instead, I continued to grind out null spheres, and every once in a while, I would come back to my island and mine all the quartz the minions had generated while I was gone. And by the end of the next day, I had officially collected over 1,000 null spheres, meaning I was just over 25% of the way through with that grind. But on top of that, I was already up to 13 enchanted quartz blocks, which is almost half of the total amount I was gonna need. So even though it was still quite the grind, this new strategy seemed like it was definitely worth the effort. For the next couple of days though, I basically just continued on with this grind. There was one cool little moment though when this happened. Finally! Finally, dude! At least the epic, let's go! I've been asking for that for like years. Finally, dude, at least we get the epic, my god. Unfortunately, really only the legendary Enderman pet is any good, but hey, it was still cool because it was my first ever epic. But I did manage to also get something that was actually pretty useful. Okay. Oh, power 6! Please, I need that. I need that, man. I need power 6 for the Juju bow, please. Oh, there it is! Yes! Let's go! Let's go! We got power 6. Yo! That's big. That's actually gonna be massive for the Juju bow. Oh my god. Let's go, dude. So yeah, I gotta say, out of all the times I could have ever gotten a power 6 book, in the middle of my Juju bow grind is probably the most perfect timing ever. Anyways though, after going absolutely insane on the grind over the course of these couple days, I had managed to collect all 4,000 of the null spheres that I needed. And now I was super close to actually being able to craft this bow. I just needed to get that last little bit of both quartz and obsidian, and thankfully both of those could be manually farmed, so I wouldn't have to completely rely on minions. In order to make things go a little bit quicker though, I started out by doing some zombie slayers to get some foul flesh. Because foul flesh would actually increase the speed that my minions place blocks by 90%. As it turned out though, actually paying to do the slayers to get all this foul flesh was a little bit more expensive than I had anticipated, and I started to go broke pretty fast. And because of that, I only managed to get 15 foul flesh in total, but it would still help out. Each foul flesh would only last for 5 hours though, so I made sure to manually mine as much quartz as I possibly could while it was active. The obsidian, on the other hand, though, was going to be a bit of a different story. Because obviously, unlike quartz, manually mining obsidian was not going to be a good strategy. Instead, my strat was to farm a mob called Obsidian Defenders, which actually have a small chance to drop an enchanted obsidian. Even farming the rest of the obsidian this way was going to take 10 plus hours, but that would still be a lot quicker than waiting on my minions. I was also even able to speed up the process a little bit more by buying the max allowed amount from the NPCs each day. And then finally, nearly 2 weeks after I had initially started grinding for this bow, I had acquired all of the materials that I needed. 32 null voids, 3 stacks of enchanted string, 32 enchanted eyes of ender on the top, 32 enchanted quartz on the bottom, and 3, 2, 1, boom. Juju short bow. We got it, baby. We can finally play Archer again and actually run some floor 7s again. Before hopping into a floor 7 run though, I wanted to max out this bow as much as I could. I started with enchanting and was actually able to get all the enchants I wanted on it. But the levels of Infinite Quiver, Overload, and Soul Eater were all on the lower side, so that's something I'd have to continue grinding for, but this bow was still going to be really good in the meantime. I also changed the reforges on my accessories to optimize for attack speed, since that would significantly boost my DPS when using the bow. And then I hopped into a floor 7 run to test this thing out. And right at the start of the run, I was already doing around 5 million damage, which was more than enough to one-shot any of the mobs. And after drinking my dungeon potion, it boosted me up to 7 million, which was pretty good considering this bow wasn't even close to maxed out yet. And by the end of the run, after we had collected our strength bonuses, I was doing 15 million damage per hit. And with how fast this thing could be shot since it was a short bow, that equated to a lot of damage per second. So yeah, thankfully my grind had been worth it because this thing was very, very good. I even managed to pull a recom during some random floor 5 run that allowed me to upgrade the bow's rarity to legendary. And now it just came down to maxing out those last couple of enchants on the bow. And luckily for me, those enchants could be obtained through floor 7, which meant that my grind for Necron's handle was officially back on. But right as I was about to get started on that grind, the entire Hypixel server went down for almost a full week. When the server finally came back up though, there was actually some good news because they had enabled 2 times skill XP on all of Skyblock. So even though I desperately wanted to get back on my grind for that handle, I could not pass up on this opportunity. So instead, while the 2 times skill XP was active, I decided to dedicate most of my playtime to farming sugarcane. Because at the moment, farming getting coins, and if I could level up my farming skill, I would just make even more coins from Nether Wart than I already did.